Morning. Just a quick word about OurCrowd. We are a new generation of hybrid venture capital and equity crowdfunding that brings money together to invest in alternative investment ideas, particularly in high tech. We've invested over $750 million in capital in the market in 6 years of operations. We've got over 25,000 accredited investors throughout the world. And we've had investments in over 160 companies, including 22 exits so far. So it's a very exciting place, but that's not the topic for today. What I was asked to talk about was something more technical. And in order to have that conversation, I thought I would take you through my own personal experience in artificial intelligence. And that experience began many years ago, but it was reintroduced in the business world when I was with CA Technologies. And somebody gave me a small diskette. This is 2002, so we still had diskettes. And they said, put this onto your computer and connect it to your Outlook. And I said, okay. And this little program began to understand the pace at which I was sending emails and the pace I was receiving emails. And it became so good at predicting this information, it would be able to tell me that within the next 3 minutes, I would be receiving an email from somebody. And it would tell me who that person was. It was even so good that it would tell me that within the next 30 minutes, I'd be writing an email to somebody. It was a little bit scary, this whole thing, and I wondered, how did it come to be that they had this program? Turns out that a professor of mine from university back in 1981 was the uncle of one of the founders of CA, and they had developed this prototype with an idea that maybe this artificial intelligence could help businesses. But we couldn't figure out what to do with it. It was interesting, it was scary, but it was not necessarily commercially viable. Until just recently, in the last 4 years, there's a company that began to use this in order to help people get rid of email that's not interesting to them. As we all know, we get a lot of emails. So that's my own personal journey. I can assure you, each of you has experienced artificial intelligence. Each of you will continue to experience artificial intelligence because it's part of the core technology of everything that we do. So let's look at this trend and understand it from an investment point of view. So every company seems to be talking about artificial intelligence, and every industry seems to be talking about artificial intelligence, and we don't have a defined term of what it really means. So it's very hard to have the conversation about artificial intelligence. The question is it real? And you have CEOs like the Ramani, who is the CEO of IBM for several years now, who talked about this being a $2 trillion industry, numbers that, this is US dollars, and numbers that we don't even understand. But she had no facts to support it. And that's the problem with the conversation about artificial intelligence, especially in the financial community. We want to understand what it means and what are the real opportunities. So it's overhyped. But one thing we do know is that for every dollar invested in some form of artificial intelligence, in some core technology of artificial intelligence, there is a multiple factor of impact on a particular economy or industry. That's actually quite interesting, because if we look at what that means in terms of the startup and the investment world, in the period of time between 2013 and today, through Q3 of 2018, we've seen $45 billion invested in startups having to do with artificial intelligence across all sectors. Now, if you look at where those investments are coming, or where the investment dollars are being spent, the United States, obviously, the number one, followed by China, followed by the UK, followed by Israel, Canada, and then the rest of the world. But it's still an unprecedented amount of investment. PwC actually talks about the future value in terms of GDP contribution of 14% between 2018 and 2030, right? 15.7, $16 trillion. And they talk about it in terms of the current output of India and China combined today. So these are big numbers attributed by different analysis to this area of artificial intelligence, which means we can't really avoid it as investors. In fact, we should be embracing it as investors. Nevertheless, artificial intelligence has good and bad. Elon Musk talked about this as the devil in a very well-publicized speech a few years ago. And at the same time, in my field, cybersecurity, Stuart McClure, who is the CEO of a cybersecurity unicorn that is based on artificial intelligence, really says, look at the good, look at the positive this can do. Go beyond some of the concerns. Look at the way that we solve problems that we were never able to solve. And it solves problems in every industry, including the financial services world. We'll talk about that shortly. So here we have this amazing technology. It's both wonderful, we see great things from it, and it's also very disturbing. If we look at how we approached other technologies that emerged in the past, and now I'm going to reference Google and the whole idea of translate. I'm sorry, not translate, I use translate, but the efficient search that we have, right? We use a service called search to be able to identify the topics and the services we need on the internet. But that's not free. We give up a lot in our privacy. Google profits from this type of search, and other companies profit from this type of search and what we do on the internet. And it's possible only because there's a core AI technology underneath. The entire Facebook platform would not exist if it were not for core AI technology. So in a sense, we say it's more helpful and we dismiss the harm. Now, in my world, again, cybersecurity, it creates an arms race. On one side, I have great companies using artificial intelligence to advance our ability to find malware and threats and attacks that can take down financial services companies, retail companies, healthcare companies, every company, any size, anywhere. They're using AI to model and simulate the attacks, to understand the patterns of the attacks, and to be able to predict those attacks in advance. At the same time, the bad guys have realized that this AI platform is actually something they can use to create even more sophisticated attacks. So again, positive and negative. Like any technology advancement, we have to worry about these things. So this remains something very much of a concern. We know that future attacks could be very, very precisely targeted at an individual within a company, within a particular company, and not to spread out across the global population. So we have to watch out for these things. Now, if we go to our own personal experiences, I wanted to take back a step and look at what's happening in the world of consumer electronics, consumer services, the robots that we as individuals have come to rely on, whether it's Waze to move around and navigate, or Netflix to help predict what movies we may want to watch or what content may be of interest to us, but also in our digital assistants. And I specifically picked out the digital assistants because no matter which one you're using, whether it's Siri on your Apple or whether it's Cortana, I don't know, does anybody use Cortana? That's the Microsoft one, or the Google Assistant, or any one of these things, and I recently started using Amazon's Echo, the entire service is based on natural language processing, the ability to speak to a computer and interface to it in ways that we never did before. That's amazing, right? Except all my communication now has to go back to the big processing center in the cloud called Amazon or Google or Microsoft or Apple or somebody else. That's a lot of data I'm releasing to them. So there's good and bad here. But the interesting opportunity is not with the consumer electronics. It's the drive that we're seeing to use these kind of interfaces to advance the way we do business, to actually bring it into the enterprise, to develop new insights, to interface with our business intelligence services. So I'm going to start to see, and in fact we are seeing, this core technology, built initially for consumers, emerging in the enterprise for enterprise services enablement. We're seeing other areas and other applications of core artificial intelligence technologies in areas like autonomous vehicles, made possible not because we suddenly have better sensors than we ever had. The sensor technology is actually not that new. The cost of developing the sensors has dropped and commercializing them, but it's the ability to aggregate a tremendous amount of information that each of the sensors in the vehicle is sending back in order to take decisions. I just read an article this morning about a collaboration between Intel, the chip manufacturer, and a shipping company in Europe. They want to develop autonomous cargo ships. The amount of data required to be analyzed at a real-time, fast pace is going to be built on a tremendous amount of computing power based on Intel chips and chips focused specifically on artificial intelligence. These are some of the things that we're seeing happen. And going back to the automotive space, which didn't pass, there we go. This is the same problems that we have in automotive. If you look at the chart, right, it's a meeting of financial people, so I had to have some charts. But if you look at 2040, right, we have 0 autonomous cars today. The estimate is that by 2040, we're going to have something like, what's the number there? I can't see it. I didn't actually put 33 million. 33 million autonomous cars driving on the roads all over the world. That's a huge increase in about 20 years. What's the driver? The driver of this, that in English, I guess that's a joke, right? The driver being not the driver, is because we're bad drivers. I'm a very aggressive driver. I happen to think I'm the best driver. But the reality is I'm probably not, and my wife is probably right. So much better that I use an autonomous vehicle to get me from one point to the other safely. And actually more efficiently, because if I don't have any accidents, I don't cause traffic problems. If I don't have traffic problems, traffic can flow. And these vehicles are going to be talking to each other as well. So we have capabilities today to begin to establish new industries. And this autonomous driving is based on the artificial intelligence capabilities that have been introduced in the marketplace. But the number one place where we see AI applied is healthcare. The advancements we've been able to make in healthcare because of the massive amounts of data that we have, patient records, histories, analysis, that's coming from healthcare. In the United States, healthcare is currently 18% of the GDP. That's a very heavy cost, even to a country like the United States. Those costs are particularly high in the United States, but they're high everywhere. And with an aging population, again, referencing the United States, that's a problem. So how do we create economies? How do we create efficiencies in this very expensive and costly service that's only going to increase? The demand for healthcare is only going to increase. And we do this by applying some of this AI technology to reduce the amount of work that people have today. It's a classic factory automation problem. How do we run more through the factory? And we can reduce, the estimates are, we can reduce, just by reducing the amount of office work, $150 billion in annual healthcare costs through the use of artificial intelligence. But the one that I always think about is medical imaging. Somewhere in the area of 50% of all medical imaging that's done is normal. It's not a break or a fracture. It's, I hurt my finger, but it's not broken. So the problem we have in healthcare is we don't have enough radiologists. And even if we outsource the reading of the images to India, we still don't have enough. So if I can reduce 50% of the images that we make in medical community by saying, let the machine identify the ones that are not a problem, then I have freed up my workforce to focus on the ones that are a problem. And that's a great advancement in healthcare and the use of AI. So let's keep moving on. I'm not going to go through there. Let's look at AI in finance. Robo-advisors, anybody? We know the term. The analysis of huge amounts of data that no financial analyst, as good as they may be, will ever be able to work through. The amount of data we have available to analyze any kind of situation and any kind of opportunity is immense. The ability to do it quickly and efficiently, and to bring in other data points and data elements that we didn't think about or that we can't consider, that's the power of artificial intelligence. And we are seeing that in the world of finance as well. Sorry, I'm out of sync here between mine and yours. The solutions that we've seen, certainly in the areas of chatbots, credit scoring, and so forth, you're probably more familiar with many of these than I am. The financial services industry as a whole has been one of the early adopters, other than healthcare. So we see a tremendous amount of effort there. Ways to analyze consumer behavior. I've seen banks that have looked at or are using artificial intelligence in very similar ways to the way that Facebook and Google and other ad tech technology companies are using that data to be able to provide better products, faster delivery of products, and understanding of what products the customer may be looking for. And this handling of the data is based on massive pattern recognition. That's the value of AI, and that's what they contribute to. I'm going to skip through the cognitive-based AI services. It talks about engagement with the customer, the insights, and the automation. We can get into technical discussions one-on-one. What I do want to go to is we'll go back, maybe, or maybe not. The 2% to 5% of global GDP, which is in the area of laundering, money laundering, right? So that's another application where we've seen huge opportunities, huge advancements based on AI. One of my portfolio companies, Theta Array, is actually a leader in this space. We are seeing a number of areas in, again, cognitive automation based on the anti-money laundering, the customer risk assessment, the transaction monitoring system, the regulatory. The payment and insurance space is benefiting from AI, and the risk management, rogue traders, which I'm sure some of you may have heard about in different parts of the world. How do we identify the patterns of rogue traders before it brings our companies into a difficult and uncomfortable situation? So there are dangers, right? We have to worry about, depending on legacy technologies, rule-based systems, because AI is not about rules. It's about being able to discover things to create new paths to decision-making. We have to worry about some of the biases, right? If I'm a developer of an AI system, it's very possible that I will introduce my own biases into that system, into the algorithms. The algorithms themselves, I'm hearing from financial institutions that they may be unauditable, that we don't know how the machine reached a particular decision. That's a little bit frightening, especially if the decision is in fact carrying the bias. So we need to have ways of creating additional transparency in AI, in the AI services that we deliver, and we need to make sure we don't infringe on customer privacy. The way this stuff works is on massive amount of data. Did the customer, in the world of privacy today, and GDPR and other regulations that are introduced in various countries, are we infringing on the rights and the needs of our customers as well in order to do the work that we need to do? But I shouldn't frighten you away with these issues, right? Because in some cases, we say, well, wait a minute, we should stop artificial intelligence development because it's going to take away jobs. On the other hand, it's going to introduce new and next generation jobs, just like all other phases of introduction of technologies. We may have, as I wrote to my son following the Wall Street Journal article about automated ships and cargo, we may have in the future a very limited number of opportunities and jobs in merchant marine, right, in navigating ships around the globe, which is something my son is fascinated with because these ships will be self-guided. But there will open up a number of new jobs in their place. There's also a call for regulations well in advance of the introduction of some of these technologies. That's probably worth thinking about, but I've never necessarily counted on politicians to negotiate through the technical issues and get the regulations right. Nevertheless, we really ought to be thinking about this, especially in light of comments by certain leaders in the world, like Putin in Russia, who talks about AI enabling future rules, future rulers, future nations of power. There are probably many, many other negatives that we can think about in terms of the introduction of AI, but I don't think we should be frightened off by them. A great example was one of my portfolio companies in the educational technology space, a huge and growing area benefiting from AI, recently won against 600 startups in a competition in Spain, this was earlier this month, for being the most interesting digital technology, and it is based on an artificial intelligence platform. With that, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Vision for inviting me to Santiago, my first visit to Chile. Beautiful city, and enjoy the rest of the morning.